have a little mid-season report from ESPN.com from Tim right now. How are you today, Tim?
Doing well, Ty. How about you?
Doing pretty well. I'm looking at what you have where, according to ESPN, their chance to make the playoffs right now, 84.7% for the Eagles. You were talking about defining the first half and how good Barkley played. You talk about the injury concerns. But also the thing that you're not sure about yet is the defense. And that's what I want to start with, Tim, because while we agree with you, we're not 100% sold, we do think they're kind of based on having how young they are and a new coordinator. Do you agree that it feels like they're maybe slightly ahead of schedule of where we thought they would be 7 games in?
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of it. I mean, they have come on strong over the last 3 games, and now that you're looking at all of like the major stats, they're in the top half of the NFL in most of them, and I think that's definitely an encouraging sign. And the thought coming in with Vic Fangio taking over is sort of like the base. There's a certain baseline for the defense, like the floor is higher, and I think that he brings a level of competency that you're seeing there, where it's a clear plan. The players are starting to understand it a little bit more. And I think that you're seeing that the back end is attached to the front end where they're kind of moving in symmetry with one another. There's a flow to it. And so it has been very encouraging. Look, when they have games against the Browns and the Giants, it all has to be tempered because you understand the quarterbacks that they're going up against, the anemic offenses that they're going against. But they were able to, after a pretty bad first drive against the Bengals, really lock it down. So that was an impressive showing. And, yeah, I would say the arrow definitely trending upward for Vic Fangio's defense right now.
Well, when you look at the offense, I think the one thing that we all know here is the injuries are starting to dissipate a little bit, and you have your stars back. What is your thought on what direction they're going in? It seems like they're trending well.
I would say that offensive performance last week against the Bengals, Ricky, is the most encouraging one that I've seen in like over a year. I probably would have to go back to 2022 to find a more encouraging one. Because we all know that the talent is there. I mean, that's been part of the frustration from the fan base of watching this group. Is like, you know that you have a really good offensive line and you have a good running game and you have star wide receivers and you have a quarterback who is an MVP runner-up a couple years ago, but it wasn't coming to fruition. And, you know, that's where a lot of the consternation, when we talk about the head coach or just kind of like why, you know, the fan temperature has been as high as it is because you see it, you know it, you know that it should be better. And part of it was because they kept doing the same kind of stuff over and over again. But what we saw against Cincinnati was different. We see now that they are leaning into Saquon Barkley and that ground game. We have 3 games of evidence now. We see that they started incorporating more play action. And I thought that Lane Johnson's comments post-game were really telling. And he basically said, like, the bye week, you have to look at what's working and what's not. You have to mix some things up. And it's a lot different when you go into a game and basically what you have been showing on tape isn't what you're presenting. So they were being more multiple, which is something Jalen Hurts has talked about. They were being more dynamic. They were leaning into some things that other teams have been routinely using, like the play-action game, like throws over the middle. That's just been purely missing from this offense for, like, who knows what reason for a year plus. So for them to finally be digging into that, to be coming up with these dynamic offensive game plans that is keeping opposing defenses on their toes is a really encouraging sign. If they can keep trending that way, there's no reason why they can't be an elite offense.
You know, it's funny you say that when you bring up Lane Johnson. This is a couple of times now, Tim, where you've come on and talked about that. We kind of wondered where some of the leadership would come from without Jason Kelce. It seems like Lane has kind of got his little shots in here and there when he feels like something needs to be said. And it's just interesting because does he seem a little bit more vocal to you? Because I don't remember him saying this last year when Fangio kept talking about, when Sirianni kept talking about doubling and tripling and quadrupling down on the same old things. I don't remember Lane saying this. Do you see a more vocal Lane Johnson this year?
I would say so. You're right, because we have talked about it on multiple occasions. I mean,
Yeah.
just a couple weeks ago where he's saying, like, listen, we got to get this operation more buttoned up, basically. And we got to get to the line of scrimmage quicker. It's preventing us from doing some of the things that we need to do, and it's allowing defenses to know exactly when the snap is getting off, which is harder for us. And then he comes out and he says, yeah, this is us switching it up, makes life easier for the offense. And I also would say that Jalen Hurts has risen his voice and his leadership in that way. I thought that his comments also post-game talking about wanting to be the ones that is effectively like imposing your will on the opposition instead of waiting and allowing them to dictate the terms, saying that, we want to be more multiple. This is something that behind the scenes, Hurts was saying essentially that he's pushing for. So, yeah, we do see some player leadership really emerging over the last handful of games for sure.
All right, when you look at the offensive line, obviously there's been some injuries, but they've still been very tough all season long. What is the latest on the injuries on the line right now?
So Mekhi Becton, who was obviously sidelined last week with the concussion, was back at practice today, Ricky. But Landon Dickerson was not there. So we had Tyler Steen working in his spot, Mekhi Becton being back. We don't have official word on what's going on with Dickerson yet. We have a practice report that will be coming up around 4 o'clock, so we'll get some information there pretty soon. But, yeah, and then Jordan Mailata, not there. He's not eligible to return from IR until the Washington game in a couple of weeks, which means that Fred Johnson will continue to hold down that spot. And even though the Eagles gave him some help on Trey Hendrickson last week, I thought that Johnson overall really acquitted himself well. So, all the flowers go to Jeff Stoutland for continuing to keep this operation humming, even with guys going down at different times.
We're speaking with Tim McManus. He does a tremendous job covering the Eagles for ESPN.com and 97.5 The Fanatic. I want to talk a little bit about Devontae Smith, because after the one catch and -2 yards the week before, you kind of expected him to make a play. And Hurts didn't force it to him. A.J. and him basically had the same amount of yards. But he saw the one-on-one coverage, and he gave Devontae a chance to make a play, and then he goes and makes the play. Tim, you grew up here, so you saw, like, the history of Eagles receivers outside of T.O. This still, I don't take this for granted. I'm still shocked the Eagles have 2 wide receivers of this caliber that can go and get it.
Yeah, and if you think back to last year when there was, kind of like the expressions of frustration from both A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith, it wasn't because they weren't getting the ball. It was more because they knew that what they were doing offensively just wasn't going to be enough to get them to where they wanted to go. And boy, did that prove correct. And so you're right. I mean, there's a mentality that comes from these guys that is team-oriented, that really shouldn't be taken for granted when you consider just how high caliber of players we're talking about. And it's right to circle in on that play, because what I was talking about before, I think, is a perfect illustration of that. Like, for whatever reason, earlier in the season, the Eagles, even when they were doing well on the ground, they weren't really connecting that with play action. And it's like it's been this slow build. And now we started to see a lot more of that. And that play was a perfect example where Hurts sells the fake, and the safety comes down and has to take 2 steps forward. And meanwhile, we got Devontae Smith that's taken a hard line towards where that safety is at, ends up getting behind him, makes a spectacular catch. And so I think that speaks obviously to the talent. What a throw, what a catch by Devontae Smith, but also now we're seeing the scheming kind of catch up to the talent, which is a very good sign for this offense.
How has the long-term outlook changed to you in the last 3 weeks?
Well, I would say that we knew that this was a boom or bust season, right, guys? I sat in the studio with you, and we've talked about that, about how, like, the ceiling is high, but so is the possibility of the whole thing kind of crumbling. We saw them getting their legs early in the season, where there wasn't, in the city's view, much room for or margin for error. And when they were not looking good, when they looked like the 2023 version, the walls were caving in. They were able to stabilize that. They've been able to make appropriate changes, and now they're starting to play up to their potential. So that pushes the possibilities, to the highest point. I mean, now they're legitimate NFC contenders as long as they keep on this trend, as long as they keep, being multiple, that they don't stay stagnant, that they continue to evolve, then, both sides of the ball are emitting signs, that really good things could be in store for this team. Now, the NFL is a roller coaster, right? So they lose to Jacksonville and the walls are falling down again, and we understand the nature of it. We also know that the teams that they've played haven't been great, and there's bigger tests ahead. So certainly they haven't passed them all. They were 10-1 last year, and we know how that ended. So we don't get too ahead of ourselves, but I think it's fair to say that the bar has been lifted up, and if they continue on this track, there's no reason why they can't be legitimate NFC contenders.
Well, that's Tim. That's going to be very fascinating how it plays out, because we agree with you that the best case scenario appears to be better than we thought. Doesn't mean they'll get to the best case, but it does appear that the ceiling for this team is a little bit higher than we initially thought, and that's at least for now, that's pretty refreshing.
I think that's a good way to put it. It's a good way to put it because it was definitely a stress test early in this year.
Yeah.
I mean, that you could feel it, like the fire Nick chants were going. That was just a couple weeks ago. He's yelling at fans like, it's like, oh man, like is this thing about to collapse? And to their credit, at least to this point, they've stabilized it. So yeah, test number one anyway, you can check off and say they passed it.
Thanks so much, Tim. We love your work, and everybody should read. ESPN did a full, basically, mid-season report on everybody, but everybody should hone in on what you wrote today as well. Thanks so much, Tim, and we'll talk to you next week.
I appreciate you guys. Talk to you soon.
All right. That was Tim McManus on the Comcast Business Hotline. Does a tremendous job covering the Eagles for ESPN.com and 97.5 The Fanatic. See, Tim is not trying to get ahead of himself, but he's liking it. To me, if you have eyeballs, it's impossible not to like what you've been seeing lately.
I think